Imagine you are sitting in the crowd at your local college for a women's basketball game. There are seconds left in what's been a hard-fought contest, and the home team is down by 1. The coach calls a timeout to draw up a play to create the winning shot for number 4, their shooting guard. Just hearing that, what are you feeling? Nerves, pressure, anticipation? Well, the girls get back out on the court. They run the play. Number 4 comes off the screen, takes the shot, and swish, she makes it. The crowd goes wild, and you watch as she lights up with the biggest smile on her face, throwing her arms in the air. Now what are you feeling? Joy, excitement, pride. It's interesting, isn't it? You're not on the court yourself. In fact, I didn't even say you're personally connected to this girl or team in any way, and yet you can feel what you imagine she's feeling. That's empathy, and in this case, it's easy, natural even. Empathy is the ability to understand or relate to the feelings of another without directly experiencing the circumstance of those emotions. And we know this, right? Empathy is not new. In fact, we often talk about how powerful it is in facilitating human connection. But what we don't often talk about is that empathy can be challenging. It's not always as easy or natural as with the excitement of a game-winning shot. So today, I'd like to talk to you about what I call the ladder of empathy. I'll share some examples along the way to help this idea come to life. We'll talk about how to reach the top and why it is so important that we get there. But before we dive into the ladder of empathy, I'd like to share a little bit about me and what motivates my interest in empathy. My name is Avery Anderson, and I'm a clinical policy coordinator and member of the Behavioral Health, Diversity, and Inclusion Steering Committee here at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Basically, that's a lot of words to say. My primary role is to review and oversee clinical policies, and I have a secondary role to help further the hospital's mission of diversity and inclusion. And what I'd like to share with all of you is my favorite part of my job, which is marrying those two roles, meaning that I get to review policies with a particular goal to promote health equity, even in the words we write to guide our care. Because ultimately, we're all here to contribute to delivering the best outcomes for our patients, no matter their background, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and many other things. So when I'm reviewing policies, I ask myself, does this policy help us deliver the highest quality care to all of our patients? And if it doesn't, how can we make it better? How can we steer our practice toward health equity? Well, as I've reflected on how to answer these questions, I keep coming back to empathy. In order to review policies, I have to step outside my own perspective to imagine the perspectives of patients and families who have a wide variety of experiences, identities, and needs, some of whom might be quite similar to mine, while others could be quite different. And this is how empathy can become more challenging. So then how do we do it? Well, several years ago, I started at Children's as a psychiatric nurse. And honestly, my patients, because who better empathizes than kids, taught me the 2 key ingredients to empathy: imagination and trust. And it's not that we as adults don't know how to do these 2 things, but I think somewhere along the line of growing up, we lose touch with the innocence of imagination and the vulnerability of trust. So with these 2 key ingredients in mind, let's get back to our ladder of empathy. We've talked about the first step, natural empathy. That was our basketball example. Perspective taking in that case was easy. It didn't require effort. You could imagine the satisfaction of making that shot, and you could trust that joy and excitement were a part of that experience. So now let's take it up a step, to the second level on our ladder of empathy. This is when the person or experience we're attempting to empathize with is less relatable to us, when differences might distract from that natural ability to empathize. Either imagining the experience or trusting the emotions attached to it isn't so easy. Let me give you some examples. Despite embarrassment in revealing this, I'm quite afraid of bugs. So junior year of college, I'm sitting on my bed doing homework when a giant buzzing creature flies in through the window. And I'll spare you the details of my reaction by just saying that my roommate clearly recognized I was scared. And now my roommate is not in the slightest afraid of bugs. He's actually quite intrigued by them. But regardless, he jumped out of bed, grabbed a cup from the desk, and within seconds, got that bug out of our room. So he was amused at my cowardice, definitely, but he didn't let that stop him or even distract him from being able to empathize with my fear. He achieved level 2 empathy. Another example. As a Christian, I might struggle to relate to the beliefs of a Muslim or Buddhist, but I can empathize with devotion to faith and aspiration toward a moral life. This second level of empathy requires effort, focus, in order to imagine, to trust, and to avoid distractions from seeing the common ground that does exist. So next, we come to the top of the ladder, the most challenging level of empathy. This is when the person or experience we're attempting to empathize with is in many ways or very clearly quite different from us. Something so unknown might initially be perceived as surprising, intimidating, threatening, repugnant, even offensive. But it is here, at this step on the ladder, we must ask more of ourselves. We must imagine where to find that common ground and trust the experiences of others to be true. This level requires intentional empathy. And this is how we become our best selves. So what patient populations require the hard work of this third level of intentional empathy? Well, I think there are many examples because we have the privilege of serving a vibrantly diverse patient population. But today, I'd like to focus on one, transgender youth. Now, I mentioned my background in psychiatric nursing, so mental health is really my passion within healthcare. And you might know, relative to the general population, youth are at particularly high risk for suicide. It's the second leading cause of death for those aged 10 to 24 years old. In fact, 19% of all adolescents report having seriously considered suicide in the last year, an awfully concerning statistic. But did you know for transgender adolescents, that number becomes 52%? 52%, more than half. Then if we look at suicide attempt, 9% of all adolescents report having made an attempt in the last year, compared to 21% of transgender adolescents. Now, youth suicide rates are already highly alarming. And while suicide is complex, these statistics, this reality, means our system is failing transgender youth in big ways, in fatal ways. Just a couple of weeks ago, 2021 became the worst year in recent history for anti-transgender legislation. A wave of over 120 bills across more than 30 states have been introduced before we can even make it to summer. And these numbers are from mid-May, so they've only grown. Around 40 of these bills ban or restrict health care for transgender youth. To be clear, this means criminalizing health care that is best practice, age-appropriate, gender-affirming, and evidence-based to support improved outcomes. Gender-affirming care, which is publicly supported by health professional organizations across the country and the world, most literally saves lives. So how can we, as humans, as healthcare advocates, and as healthcare providers, better address the needs of transgender youth today? Empathy. Level 3, intentional empathy. Now, I think it's fair to say that for many people, transgender experiences and perspectives might be hard to relate to or hard to understand. And that's okay. But we can't let it, and it shouldn't stop us from reaching the top of the ladder. Now, when I introduced this last step on the ladder, I didn't share an example. So let's do that. If you are not transgender, you likely have not experienced gender dysphoria. And not all transgender people do experience it or experience it in the same ways, but I'm going to share an example to help convey one way. Every day when we leave the house, we put on shoes. If you have a pair of shoes that fit, they match you, they're comfortable, then you probably get through the whole day without ever having to think about the fact that you're wearing shoes. Now imagine you have a pair that are too tight, they don't match you, they're causing you blisters and pain, then you probably don't get through much of the day at all without worrying about how uncomfortable your shoes are. In this example, shoes represent the body. Gender dysphoria can be painful, agonizing even. It's a feeling you can't shake because unlike your shoes, you can't just take off your body. Now I recognize there's not always going to be a helpful metaphor to contextualize foreign experiences. So how else can we consistently practice intentional empathy? Well, luckily for us, we learn this from the kids, our patients. Remember those two key ingredients? Imagination and trust. We must imagine where that common ground is through curiously listening and trusting the voices of transgender youth sharing their experiences with us. In doing so, we can achieve intentional empathy. We at Nationwide Children's Hospital are not just along for the ride in pediatric healthcare. We are leading the charge. So let's take on the challenge of intentional empathy, advocate for transgender youth, and climb toward health equity. And if you are intimidated by the challenge of intentional empathy as it relates to transgender experiences or perspectives, I have some good news for you. If you were able to empathize with the basketball player who took the shot, then you were able to empathize with me. By graciously listening for the last 10 minutes, you've been hearing the perspectives of a transgender man. You have already started your journey up the ladder, and I invite you to continue. Thank you.